Hello, thank you for joining us for this Manchester Literature Festival event. My name is Helen Mort. I'm an author and amateur climber and outdoors enthusiast based in Sheffield, and I'm really honoured today to be in conversation with Dara McAnulty. I'm going to introduce Dara and then we're going to start the event, which we'll be talking for roughly sort of 45 minutes or so. Dara McAnulty is an activist and prize-winning author. His book, Diary of a Young Naturalist, which I've got here on my desk, charts a turbulent year in a turbulent world and how still moments of noticing are anchors in that world. And one of the things that I admire and enjoy most about Dara's writing is his way of attending to plants, rocks, animals, and human animals as well, and how his attention illuminates and connects them and shows us the connections between them. In spring, all things levitate. A dandelion can become a windswept umbrella. Night crackles with storm, mountains are for the stopping of time. Winter reveals spires of bareness. The quality of the prose really reminds me of my favourite poet, the late great Norman MacCaig, whose work particularly on mountains and on the landscape of Ascent I just can't get enough of. And with that in mind, I just wanted to share my favourite, the quote from the book that I've most thought about since I first read it, which is this: whenever I'm high on a mountain, I make an agreement with myself to leave behind all human worries. And for me, that absolutely gets to the heart of my experience in the mountains and what it's like to go on a life-changing journey or moment of noticing. You think nothing will ever be the same again, and you try your best to keep those human worries out. And of course, it never works, but it's good to remind yourself of those moments. So warm welcome to Dara. Thanks so much for joining us. Before we have our conversation around the book and the issues that it raises, I think Dara's going to read an extract from Diary of a Young Naturalist. So yeah, welcome Dara, and over to you.
Thank you, and I'm just going to start off with a little reading. It's probably my favourite in the book because it's basically as far away from summer as possible. Thursday, the 21st of March. There are unfurlings in the forest. Anemones and ferns are springing from patient earth, from dim and ancient spaces. Even song is erupting, and the airspace is once again crowded with music after the winter silence. Bluebells are on the cusp. Spring light and warmth are spreading across the mountains and into me. I have embraced the darkness, but now this feeling of light is intoxicating, explosive, and alive. By March, I usually get impatient, itching for the spring, but not this time. I've been enchanted by every day, drinking in every moment. Tomorrow, I'll be taking to the streets of Belfast with other students, giving voice with many, not on my own like the last time. I feel happy about it. Civil disobedience is better as a group, and I won't have to bear so much weight and attract too much attention. The eco group will be taking a break soon while I study up for some of the GCSEs I'll be taking this year. But we've also been upping up our game in school, giving up lunch breaks to gather around with banners and spreading awareness. I'm bursting with excitement about it all. I've never felt this way. It feels so alien, refreshing, and electrifying. I wonder if it's because of all the busyness, the action, the cramming in of wild experiences. I'm unfurling too, and feel so much more, dare I say it, stable, not stagnant, never stagnant, and never blindly taking it all for granted. I think that would be disastrous. I know everything could change at any moment, but so many more pieces seem to be fitting together. And I read that piece because just yesterday I was on the streets protesting in Belfast, so it felt apt with the same people that I did with that demonstration back then. And that demonstration that I talk about in the book is still it's like a legend of climate of our climate activism. But I was at one yesterday, and it was in the pouring rain, but we still managed to get thousands of people to come out and try to march for a better future.
Thanks, Dara. And yeah, thank you for reading that section. That's a really great way to begin. And we'll talk maybe more about activism and writing as activism later. But to start off with, actually, this does link to it kind of as well. I wanted to start off, if it's okay, with trees. So I was reading in the book that your name means oak. Is that right? Which I thought was beautiful. And I'm talking to you from Sheffield, or from a part of, and specifically from a part of Sheffield where the Sheffield Tree Action Group, STAG, is kind of extremely active. And I'm always really aware of that ongoing protest and of the importance of trees in our part of the city. And I was so struck by a part in your book where you talk about trees and you say, I believe trees are like us, or they inspire the better parts of human nature. And I just really like that idea of trees inspiring us, and kind of, it's like the opposite of anthropomorphism. I thought it was great. Anyway, I just wondered if I could start by asking a bit about that, about the importance of trees and that line in the book.
Okay, so yes, my name in Irish does mean oak, and interestingly, I took an interest in mythology and Celtic mythology, and by utter pure chance, maybe not chance, the name Dara has an older root of the word of Dree, and that is the root of the word Druid, which means to be of oak knowledge. And I'm gonna say, but like, it just shows the importance of the oak tree. It was considered the center of all knowledge in Celtic society, and that sort of connection was kind of fun. So that already is showing the importance of trees in culture, that the leaders of the land in Celtic society were the Druids, and their entire idea came behind trees and the power within them and the power of knowledge that came out of those trees, because the trees had been there for hundreds of years, especially the oak, which can live for 900 years. That's like, in Celtic times, that's like, they died twice as quick as us. So like, that's like over 20 generations of people, of stories, and that's something quite magnificent when you sort of think about all of that human existence in 900 years, all contained within a tree. And that's the first thing that I find quite special about trees, is that sort of mystery about them, and that wonder about all the things that tree has seen over its lifetime. And also, I just love being around trees. I love just being around trees, touching them, putting my hand up against bark. But there's that special feeling that you get, that special connection that you get with hand on bark, it's electrifying, and you sort of feel rooted and connected. And I think that's probably the biggest thing about trees for me. And I do feel a lot calmer around them. Mountains are great. They can take your breath when you feel a bit exhausted after them. Beaches the same, they can absolutely buffet you, but always being around trees just makes you feel calm inside and peaceful. And that's something that's been essential to me throughout the book as well, like getting over mental health problems. Trees are that sort of stationary thing. It's always like they've been there for so long, and they'll be there for you. And that was something quite special for me.
It's incredible listening to you describe that, not least because one of my close friends in Chesterfield, the town where I grew up, which is just outside Sheffield, famous for nothing except having a crooked church spire. But there's quite a big Druid community in Chesterfield, strangely. One of my best friends is a Druid, and I will never ever forget the day that we went to look at a yew. I was thinking about the ancientness of yew trees in a churchyard in Darley Dale, and he encouraged me to do that for the first time, to put my hand against the bark of the different types of tree. And I almost imagined that I could tell which kind of tree it was from feeling it, you know, not even looking at it. And so how you describe the energy of trees and that specialness of actually touching the bark is just incredibly moving, really.
I have an interesting story about the yew, especially because there's a special type of yew called the Irish yew. It's only found here. It's been sold everywhere else, like, but oh well. But it came from a single tree. And the difference between it and normal yew is that if you know yew, the leaves sort of droop down. It goes upwards. It's quite bizarre looking. So basically it sort of arches up like this. And it came from a single tree on Colca. A Victorian tree person who makes arboretums decided he was going to take it off the mountain and cultured up the first and basically made sure that this single genetic mutation survived, which is kind of cool. And now you'll find, if you ever see a yew with the branches that go upwards, that came from a single tree on Colca. Or so the legend goes, I guess, but I choose to believe this one.
That's amazing. I always think of yews as sort of like downward facing sort of trees, and the idea of that is one that's like that. It's incredible. This is terrible. This is definitely a poet inclination. My first thought was, there's a poem in that. That'd be a great like, poem about that. And actually, I love the way that poetry comes into your diary and the way that you write, and obviously you write poetry as well. And I think we share, I'm not saying this is your favourite poem because I don't know if it is, but we share a favourite poem in Seamus Heaney's Kevin and the Blackbird. And I thought it was so interesting that you talk about that at the end of the book, about what the saint does, and the idea of him just sitting there holding his arm out for ages, and how Heaney uses that word hurting forearms. I always think that's a great choice of verb. You know, why use anything else? That is exactly what it is. And I thought it connected really nicely to the noticing that you're doing in the book. And so I kind of wanted to ask you a bit about your writing process, really, and about what keeping a diary, a journal, means to you, and has meant to you.
So I think, well, I had always been writing a diary. I still do. Never going to be published. This one's not going to be published because I don't like doing the same thing twice. But I just loved writing, and I loved recording my personal experiences. And I think poetry came into a lot about my writing, because as a child, I did not read a lot of nature books, much to a lot of people's surprise. I've read a few of Robert Macfarlane's books, most of them, and basically, other than that, Sang Country Almanac, and that's about it. But poetry, I had read a lot of. Seamus Heaney, read most of his poetry cover to cover. Kavanagh, I've read a lot of Kavanagh. John Clare, absolutely love John Clare. I think The Landrail is possibly one of my favorite poems of all time. And I read a lot of poetry. So I think that was a big thing for me in my writing process then, because I had all of these words going through my mind, and so it didn't really fall under the traditional way of writing prose, I guess. It became a little bit more it fell in with a bit more form, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Like it was written in a prose format, obviously, but it was through the lens of writing like a poem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that comes through in that thing about attention and noticing is something that, like I say, it reminds me of Norman McCaig, who's got this way of noticing that I think is really unique. And yeah, no, absolutely. Has it, so in terms of the writing, well, two questions really. One is to do with especially with the idea of journaling and diaries and observing, has publication changed the way that you now write, or are you able to kind of put that out of your mind when you're actually writing?
I kind of put it out of my mind. I don't really think about it too much. Because my writing style hasn't really changed, which is frantic note taking whenever I get an idea. I never really sit down and go, I'm going to write today, because I'm writing every day. I just have scattered notebooks. It's really disorganized and it's horrible and it hurts my OCD, but it works. So I basically just have notebooks around the house, and if I get an idea, jot it down quickly because I know I'm going to forget it within about 5 seconds, and then remember that I put a notebook somewhere, pick it up, and then write it down, and then get my ideas from past Dara's ramblings, write it all down, hopefully edit it all up into something that's mildly coherent, and hopefully it sounds good.
You have no idea how reassuring it is to hear about your notebook process, because I do the same thing with notebooks. And I once I was donating some to a library archive, and I thought it's going to be the archivist's worst nightmare.
I know, it's awful.
It's just, and I know Tony Harrison used to keep his notebooks in a really meticulous way, almost like he knew that someone was going to read them one day. And it sounds like we are both the opposite of that.
Oh God.
And you also say
nobody wants to see the notebooks.
I think there's a really important question that you raise about the act of writing itself. Well, there's lots of them in the book, but there's a particular point where you sort of ask yourself, ask the reader maybe as well, is writing enough? And I thought that was, I mean, blimey, that's a big question, isn't it? To say to you, what do you think now?
Yeah.
Written, is writing enough? I mean, what would it mean for it to be enough anyway? We can't continually write because it's never enough, and is at the same time. But yeah, any thoughts on that kind of?
So I've sort of, I feel like that was the resolution of the book, was me sort of realizing that perhaps it isn't enough, perhaps nothing will ever be enough, but it's still necessary. And it still has to happen. People of any artist profession have to exist, because otherwise, what do we dream about? What world do we wish for? What hope can we have when we cannot see the best possible world or the worst possible world to steer away from? That's the writers, the artists, the musicians' job. And I think I've been coming over to that realization over the years that's made me feel a bit more comfortable about writing as activism as well, is that it makes you think about how the world could be, in spite of the way that the world is now, which is pretty horrible. But then thinking about what can we do to inspire hope in people. And I'm a firm believer that without hope, nothing ever gets done. Why would you do something if you didn't think it would matter? It's almost becomes useless. Everything becomes worthless. And obviously it isn't. So therefore, in my mind, hope can persist. So that's why I'm always hopeful now. I wasn't so hopeful in the book. I was a bit angry, a bit upset, and I'm a bit pessimistic about nearly everything. I'm a bit different now. I've sort of actually at the end of the book, I was a bit more uplifting, and realizing that I can go out into the world, write about the things that I care about, and know that that it does make a difference. It can change how people look at the world, because it sort of works with another thing that I do believe in, is that whenever you read something, whenever you see something, that changes how you see the rest of the world. Knowledge changes perception. And because I remember people coming to me after they read the book and saying that they now recognize the Blackbird song.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, they're now seeing the world in a different way. So basically, now people, after reading my book, were seeing the world in a different way. And I found that really powerful, having people come back to me and saying that, because that gave me hope. That gave me the idea that writing can change the world, because it changes people.
Mm-hmm.
And people have the power to change the world. And I think for that realization, made me feel a little bit more like, gave me that security feeling inside, that writing, although it may never be enough, is absolutely necessary.
I'm nodding furiously because I couldn't agree more. But I think as well, I mean, I am a massive pessimist, so perhaps I'm not a reliable witness, but your book is by no means as sort of, you talked about it being angry and kind of pessimistic in that way. Yeah, it's realistic.
Well, yeah.
A record of the time that you were writing about, and kind of ongoing, but it's not. It is suffused with hope. Hope about writing and the importance of it, and the necessity of it, but also about continuing to notice moment by moment, and continuing to anchor yourself and find comfort in the world around you, in the natural world. And I love the part where you talk about the responsibility as well. I think you describe it as the responsibility to shout from the rafters about what we care about, which I guess applies to your work as an activist, as well. Writing is activism, but outside of writing, but also in the book. And I'm just interested in what you'd like to see more of in writing. I feel it seems to me we're at a point where there's a huge amount of commercial interest in what sometimes gets called nature writing, sometimes it gets called place writing. And you can sit and debate all day what these terms actually mean. But what would you like to see more of in that kind of on those book tables in Waterstones and other bookshops? You go in and you look at the kind of display on nature.
Yeah, I would like to see a bit more diversity in the type of writing. Like, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do a diary, is because well, actually, that's a lie. I decided to do a diary because I was writing a diary and it was never intended to be published. But I would like to see people sharing more personal stories with nature, because nature writing, that quote unquote genre, doesn't really exist, because nature's so bundled up with everything else, and human connection to it, that it becomes usually, hopefully, a story about mental health. It could be a story about school. It could be a story about human nature. It could be a story about so many different things, yet have that root in the natural. All it has really is that root in the natural world, which puts it into this genre of nature writing. So what I'd like to see people is try to, because we've had about hundreds of books that are like descriptive nature writing about people that are solely focused on nature, but somehow still seem to miss the point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes sense, because we've described everything that goes on in nature forever. And I'd like to see people expressing more personal human emotions through the root, through the center point, that fulcrum of nature and using nature as a medium to express what they want to say. If that sort of makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. Yeah. And you do that very much. I mean, that's why in my introduction, I was talking about the way you write about human animals, because we are also animals. And if I think, yeah, that thing about if we distance out, if it's too observational, we're sort of distancing ourselves from, we're part of these ecosystems as well, as we know, and we kind of and yeah, to acknowledge that the things are kind of really intertwined, which I think, yeah, you do. And we've got such a sense in your book of your life running parallel to, but also being incredibly intertwined with that as well. And I think a diary is a really good way to do it, and a different way of doing it as well. I guess I could ask you about writing and about reading and about your influences probably all day, but going back to noticing and the idea of findings, because I think for me there's a lot in Diary of a Young Naturalist about findings and discoveries, and those, whether large or small, whether it's things that you're realizing, or it's moments that you've observed that sort of change you. And it made me think about a great bit in Kathleen Jamie's Findings, I think it is, where she talks about how we don't look up enough. And I think she's in Edinburgh and she's looking at the tops of the buildings and spotting things. She's like, actually, we never look at these things normally. We don't look up. I guess I wanted to ask you a bit about your favourite findings, or if you've had any recent findings or discoveries that have been particularly memorable. My latest one was literally it was a toad from our garden in the wall. There was a hole in the wall of the garden. There was a little toad hiding in there, and I just thought that's the kind of finding you have to write down.
So I've been at the coast a lot, and I've been seeing a lot of stuff. I've been especially loving the gannets, but that's hardly a finding. They're like right up at you, and the terns. But rock pools are incredible little places, aren't they? You can keep on looking, and it's just like it comes at you. And I found this little creature. It was a while back, but honestly, it absolutely made my year. It's a little creature called the sea hare.
Sea hare.
It's like a sea slug, except it has a shell inside its body.
Oh, wow.
It's a very strange brown-looking creature. I nearly missed it, and I was just looking at it because it like swims, I guess. Sort of like, I mean, if you've ever seen a picture of or a video of a nudibranch kind of moving, it sort of moves like that, but a little bit more floppy. It's kind of funny.
Called again, sorry, a sea hare, like a rabbit type creature.
Yeah. Not related to rabbit in any way. And I just saw, because it was so hidden, because it's like a brownish color, and I just sort of was looking at the rock pools, and I would, because sometimes I just like staring into rock pools and I've been staring at it for a solid 20 minutes at this same patch of water. And then I noticed it, and I was like, how did I not notice that one before? Because it was hardly moving. It's a snail. It's not really a snail.
It's making me think of St. Kevin and the Blackbird again, the way that you look at the rock pool, that idea of just sitting there and kind of
I spent a lot of time looking off into random blank spaces for good lengths of time without realizing that time has really passed. And that's a big habit of mine, because I just feel I can feel calm, and the longer I look into that pool, the longer it'll be until I have to go home. So you got to do what you got to do.
So my partner has a theory that people either look, I mean, everyone's got a theory, haven't they? And the world is full of two types of people, those who have theories and those who don't. But he's always saying that people either tend to look upwards by default or downwards. And he thinks that because I'm a mountain and I'm always looking upwards and I notice things in the sky and sort of on the horizon, he likes ponds and caves and places of immersion. So he's always looking downwards. And he kind of has this idea that everyone has a version of that. Are you a looking upwards or a looking downwards person, do you think?
Depends on where I am.
Yeah.
If I'm in a forest, actually, I think I break the trend.
Oh, interesting.
Oh no.
Maybe the theory is just completely wrong and made up.
Because I look down for considerable lengths of time because I'm looking for stuff in the ground. But if I hear if the sound changes, the soundscape sort of, I can feel a change, I start looking upwards because I know that birds might be there. So it depends whether or not I look up or down. But mostly down, I must admit. But if I'm out in, unless I am in a mountainous terrain, then I will at all costs look up for some reason.
And I think I cannot possibly let this conversation get towards its last parts without asking you about raptors, because they're so important in the book, and I know that you love them. And you may be sick of talking about this, so that's fine. But what is it about raptors that you love so much? What is it that fascinates you?
I think it was because they were the first bird that I really cared about on like an existential level, because I remember very clearly I was in primary school. I think it was 2008. I'm not going to say that for certain because my dates are horrific, but basically the RSPB came into our class and it was for the red kite project, and because they had reintroduced red kites into Ireland, and they were like satellite tagging them. Funnily enough, the project that I would be involved in like 10 years later, which is very cyclical, and and I ended up living right beside the place where they were originally released. Long story, but I after the talk, I just spent the entire day looking up raptors and red kites, finding out which ones were extinct. Found the hen harrier, didn't, kind of glossed over it, went for the cooler eagles at that time. That one did change. And I remembered it was the first time, because I'd always been crawling around loving nature, but it was at that point where it changed from fascination to actual care, if that makes sense. I can mark that as a distinct transition point from just going, ooh, cool nature, to going, oh, nature, wow. And how I can protect it as well. So I think that's why raptors are so close to my heart, because they were those first birds that really just, and of course the blackbird, because it was the bird that I could listen to, because I lived in Belfast and there were not a lot of birds in Belfast. So you sort of were you got what you get, you have to take what you got in Belfast, and the blackbird and the blue tit were those birds. And so when I went to Fermanagh and then I saw the hen harriers, then I was just like, this is my bird now. And then the red kites as well.
I think it's really important to sort of say that it kind of goes back to what you were talking about with nature writing, and how quote unquote nature writing, and how what directions it could go in. Is that like urban nature in urban contexts, and that is a welcome thing, that there has been more writing recently about that as well, and birds in particular. Maybe the lockdown has been good in that way, because people are sort of finally, you know, everyone's talking about birdsong, and noticing the difference in the qualitative and quantitative difference.
I'm expecting a good quantity of books about urban nature writing to be published within it. I'm expecting the boom to be about 2 years.
Yeah.
Because, good books, unless it's hopefully, unless it's a diary, get published in 4 years. Diaries are quicker because it's a diary. But I do hope to see a load of those books, because there definitely has been a lack of that style of the, and also you're going to have an extreme emotional and personal connection at that point in time. It was a terrifying period, and especially the first lockdown. You were like, oh my god, what on earth is going on? And there was a lot of chaos going on, and nature was that stable connection that a lot of people had at that time. And I'm sure there probably already is some really interesting, I've already read a wealth of small essays about it already, but I do hope that we get some actual proper good books about it, because it's definitely been an interesting one for humans, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And also maybe the fear of this situation makes people consider their position in the scale of things a bit more. Maybe there's something, I don't know. I guess I've got a couple more questions, if that's all right, and anything else that you want to chat about that we've not covered. But this kind of links to that, I think, into lockdown, into that, like the anxiety of lockdown and the big scale of things. I've long been interested through my own connection with nature in the word awesome, which of course we hear all the time at the moment, but its original kind of meaning and the double meaning of awe.
Yeah.
And I think I just remember going to, well, I've only been once, but going to Greenland for the first time and being in that landscape, and I kept thinking about awe, not just in terms of, oh wow, this is great, but awe and fear, and the fear that you can feel. And I think one of the things that I admired so much about your book is that some of the descriptions of that in relation to natural phenomenon and climate change, climate emergency, but also in terms of the personal and the way you describe, like, I think the metaphor you use is like an anxiety army, which I just thought was absolutely spot on. And also writing about imposter syndrome and all those kinds of things. I always think the only people you have to worry about are the people that don't have imposter syndrome. They're the ones who probably are the imposters. But the way you write about those things and tie that into your way of looking and noticing made me think about awe and awe in nature, and whether that was something that you relate to, that double sense of the awesome when you're out and when you're in those landscapes, I guess.
Yeah, there's definitely been a few times when I felt that specific feeling of awesome, as in terrifying expanse of feeling. That would probably be up in mountains usually, especially this time when, help us, my brother wanted to go up into the mountains during a storm. This is not advice. Please do not do this. You take your life into your own hands. And because it was 80-mile-an-hour winds, and so it was kind of dangerous and probably shouldn't have been up there. And this is coming from the person who climbed up cliffs in Raffle. But basically, we got up to this, and it was completely misty. Like, you could not see for the life of you at least a few feet in front of you. And so we made our way up the mountain, and we got to like this top. It's like it's a really, you know what a tor is? Mm-hmm. Massive rock, exposed rock. And it sort of formed up into this massive gateway. So the wind sort of funneled straight through like a crack down the middle. It was all very smooth, the rock, this granite rock. And So the wind was coming straight for this, and we sort of like a scene out of like some film, mist in the air as we sort of scraggle along heath to try and get across, and then realize as soon as we got to the other side that we went the wrong way and didn't actually have to go for the thing. But anyway, we got through, and we were sort of just high enough so where we could see just about over the fog. And oh my God, like it was incredible. Like, so, but the fog sort of rose up and down, so you could occasionally see for like miles and miles or a few feet. And the wind was like 80 miles an hour. So there was that fear as well in there. And then that awe of that landscape was just like, I've never really experienced anything that powerful. Mountains do that, don't they?
Absolutely, and wind as well. I think wind is one of the weather phenomena that is the most scary, because there's just the power of it and the movement. And the thing you said, I can really vividly imagine it about the mist and the change in perspective, where you can see far and then you can't see very far. That's so that's why glaciers, that's why that word awesome came to me looking at glaciers, because things look like they're quite close, and then you see a boat or something. Like, oh wow, that's miles away. It's the scale of it. And I think you capture awe a lot in your diaries. I know we're running out of time, but I do have a last question, if that's all right. It's maybe a bit of a silly one, but it's about dogs, because
Ruthie's there, she's asleep.
I wish
I actually show
say
her.
hello. Can we see her?
There she is.
Oh, she's beautiful. I was very excited when I learned that you had a sight hound, because I've always had whippets. Sadly, don't have any at the moment. They've lived to an old age but then died. And I think there's something special about sight hounds, but dogs in general. Do you find that walking and going out with a dog changes your way of noticing, particularly with sight hounds, because they're quite bad at being called back? They're very alert to things.
Rosie's completely different to your usual. She doesn't like walking.
Oh, okay.
So walking with Rosie is like a battle against humanity, against your own humanity, because she'll stop and sniff, and for like a solid 10 minutes will not move, or she'll want to walk in a certain way. So you can be a bit frustrating, Rosie. She's not listening, or she is listening, but she's ignoring me. But at least then I get to take life a little bit slower with Rosie.
And the smell thing must be really interesting, because it's a totally different way of apprehending the world. Their information comes through. So you probably have a sense on a walk with her of where all the interesting smells are, just by where she goes, and that kind of
there's just some vivid locations etched into my brain, especially you've got to sort of walk beside the road to get down to the coast. There's a specific spot just before you make the turn off. So you have to sit by the road for the cars to let her, and I basically memorize the entire spot. It's there's some brambles. There's about this much of the path. It's really thin road. But God, I love Rosie though.
Dogs are the best, right? Sight hounds, especially, they're the best writing companions, because they're easy, as well as like they just like to sleep, don't they? And it's
they do. Rosie is.
I'm glad we got to meet. I'm very
it's the one thing that especially children is they just say, I love Rosie. And it was the reason with Wild Child, the picture book, in every single one of the sections, like the main spreads, Rosie's in it. And so I've gotten like hundreds of pictures of Rosie sent to me, like children's drawings of Rosie.
They're just such photogenic.
I know, Rosie, you're a star.
She's great. She's famous.
You're famous, Rosie.
I could also ask you about dogs all day, but I will restrain the questions. I think we're coming to the end of the event, unless there's anything that you want to talk about.
I don't think so.
Good. In which case, it just remains for me to to thank you hugely from the bottom of my heart for this conversation. It's just been interesting for me and inspiring, and for the audience too. And to thank Manchester Literature Festival, thank anyone who's watching this for your time, and to say that there are lots of other events in the programme for the Manchester Literature Festival. Do check out the other things that are happening, especially there's a lot of events that have thematic connections to some of the things we've talked about tonight. And finally to say, do go and buy copies of this book and others in the bookshop, the online I think it's online Waterstones bookshop. So do we've got matches.
Yeah, we've got matching.
Like a yellow book, by the yellow is a great colour.
It was a gutsy decision to go with the yellow.
It's great. It stands out. It
does stand out.
Thanks everybody, and enjoy the rest of the festival. And thanks most of all to you, Dara.
Thank you so much. It's been great to speak about this.